All right, good morning, guys. So, I'm working on just some tune revisions, just kind of knocking out some things this morning. And it occurred to me, I don't think I've ever really made a video about dialing in your wide open throttle fueling. So, it's not really that hard of a process, but there's a couple tricks when you're working with binary editor that I've learned over the years that make it a lot easier to do this stuff if you want to, manually map things out and get it dialed in. So I've already got a data log pulled up. You don't need a lot of background about the combo. It's just a simple, it's a C-Baza car, so it's an SN95 T4MO based strategy, and it's a blower car. Nothing crazy, but small blower car. So we're really kind of in the infancy of tuning this car wide open throttle. This is actually only the second log we've done wide open throttle. The first one was way lean, so we increased the fuel. We got here. So this one's, not off like it was before, but it still needs to be fine-tuned. So we got the big change made last time. We're much closer. Now we need to try to fine-tune it. And then I suspect after one more loop here, we'll be pretty good. So once you get the data log pulled up, the very first thing you need to do is you just need to figure out what part in the log is where you're making the wide open throttle hit. And so obviously just bringing up your throttle position sensor is the easiest thing to do. And you can see right here it's pegged out and flatlined, so we know that this is kind of our working range here. So what I like to do is just kind of zoom way in on that range, and I like to see kind of the tip-in response too, so I want to make sure that I'm not totally getting rid of just this little bit right before we go wide open throttle. So something about like that. Looks pretty good. Okay, so this is kind of my left to right range where I want to be zoomed in here. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to show both the Lambsy and the air-to-fuel ratio. So this has the wideband being logged here. Now because we're an open loop, the Lambsy for side 1 and 2 are going to be the same. But if you really want to pick it apart, I know that the wideband sensor is installed on the same side of the engine as Lambsy 2, so we'll do that. Okay. So kind of bringing these three things up. So we've got throttle position. We really don't need to look at this particularly much at this point. We just want to get it out of the way and know where that start and end range is. Now, the AFR and Lambsy, to really try to get these where you can quickly visualize where am I lean, where am I rich, how lean am I, how rich am I, you're going to want to try to get these things where they're closely aligned. But the problem is you have a scale factor here that you can independently scale each one of these things that you're showing. And if the scales aren't the same, even though something like this looks extremely close, when you put them side by side, when we scale them, they probably won't be. So right now I'm clicked on AFR on the left. And for this particular tag that we're looking at, you can see that its range is from 8 AFR up to 28. That's just how it's visually scaled on the y-axis. If I go to Lambsy, so instead of 8 to 28, we'll go to Lambsy, it's 10 to 20. So even though these overlay and they look like they're real close and all that, the scale's totally different. This doesn't mean anything. So what we want to do is we want to rescale both the AFR and Lambsy where they're at the same scale. And there's a trick to this that's not super obvious if you've never done this before, because usually what you're trying to do is you use these plus and minus here to zoom one out, zoom one in, and you try to get them until these numbers on the left are about the same. But there's actually a direct way to do this. This little button right here, this chart properties, when you go in here, you can just manually set the scale for each one of the different things you're logging. So if I want Lambsy 2 and AFR to be the same, and I know kind of what my range is here, I might do something like this, like maybe around 10 to 15, and I'll put that one at 10 to 15 and then hit apply changes. And when you do that now this is actually meaningful. You can see that fuel was, very close right through here. You can see that it progressively got leaner and leaner because the AFR starts to drift higher as the RPMs go up than the Lambsy. The Lambsy was pretty flat here. But again, now if I click on this, scale is 10 to 15 for AFR. We go to Lambsy, it's still 10 to 15. So now you can without any question see where am I rich, where am I lean. So the first thing I want to look at here is really this top range. I know that kind of throughout here I'm very close, and I very slowly drift as I go up here. So the next thing I want to bring up into the overlay is the mass air voltage. And the thing is, when you're working with mass air tuning like this, I don't really care what the actual airflow value is. It's kind of not relevant to me. I just want to know what voltage are we at and what percentage off am I. Do I need to, have more fuel or less fuel, and about by what percent? So I'm going to start here. I'm going to go to the very end of this right before the MAF voltage drops off, and I want to see kind of where it peaked. Okay, so on this combo right now, it peaked at 4.09 volts. So what I would do before I really start doing anything else is I'm going to go into my tune, pull up the mass air transfer, and I want to establish, where do I have points here? And I actually happen to have one at exactly 14.1 or 4.1. So that's convenient for me. So I'll start there, and we need to figure out how far off we are. So right in this range, and this stuff isn't ever perfect, but you can see that we're pretty consistently, lean. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to the AFR, and this is important. Click on the AFR, and whichever thing you're clicked on here on the left, it'll always be highlighted yellow on the main screen. But now the crosshair matters, because as I go up and down, left and right, this X and Y number down here at the bottom, if you stay focused on that while I move around, it tells me exactly where I am as far as this particular item, which is AFR. So what I can do in here is now I can just kind of look at this average, and I can see that for a second it's a little higher, a little lower. I'm going to kind of put my cursor right in the middle vertically between those two areas and look down at the bottom right and look at my Y. It shows me that where my cursor is right now. It's about 1203, 1204. And what we were looking for was 1143. So now I'm going to calculate that error. I want to look at the difference between 1203 and what I was trying to get, which was 1143. So if you pull up a calculator, the easy way to calculate this is just to put in what was the difference between the AFR and the Lamsey. So I'm going to do 12.03, which is what we had, minus 11.43, which is what we expected, and that's how far off we are. Now to put this in terms of percentage, now I want to take this number and I want to divide it by what we were trying to get to, which was 1143. And I know I'm 5.2% off, so you actually would have to get percentage, you'd have to kind of multiply this by 100, but when it's 0.052, that actually means that I'm off by 5.2% about. And which direction are we off? Well, we know that our AFR was higher than what we were asking for, so that means we're running lean, and now we know that we're running lean by 5.2%. So to correct that at this voltage point that we're at here, I'll go back in the tune. I'm going to go to that voltage point, and sometimes, we got lucky here that it kind of fell exactly where we were. It won't always be like that, so if the voltage point you're really caring about is something that's right in between the two and it doesn't make sense to rescale things here, then you might actually make this adjustment to the two things that are kind of closest around. If you're in between the two, let's make this adjustment to both, but I'm just going to make it to this one. So we're off by 5.2%. We're lean, so what we know is that the mass air kilogram per hour needs to go up, and that will increase fuel, and if I pull it down, it'll decrease fuel. So I know that we need to go up. We need to go up by 5.2%. So I'm going to take that value, multiply it, and just multiply it by 1.052. So it's basically 1 plus whatever your that calculation we did earlier was. So multiplying by 1.052, this is going to go from 1402 up to 1475. So my fuel should be very, very close here. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the next point down, 3.9. And I'm going to jump into my chart, and I'm going to just look at the mass air voltage here, and I'm going to scroll over till I see where we're about 3.9. Okay, so 3.9 is right in here. So to be honest, the same change applies. We're kind of in this same working range, so without even really doing the math, again, the Lamsey didn't change in this area, and my calculation is going to be very, very similar. I'm just going to increase that by 5.2% also. So 3.9, multiply 1.052, we've got that change made. Okay, next point down is 3.7. Okay, so 3.7 is going to have us right around here. Now at this point the Lamsey is a little different because as boost is climbing, I'm running it a little richer. So here the Lamsey is 11.55, and going back over to my AFR and kind of looking at our crosshairs here, maybe somewhere about right there, down at the bottom right corner it says it's 11.91. So I'm going to run the same calculation here. We'll do 11.91, which is what we had, minus 11.55, which is what we tried to get, what we were commanding. We're off by that much. Now divide that by what we were commanding, 11.55. We have a 3.1% error rate. So we go back here. Same thing, we know we have a 3.1 error, and we know that we're running lean, so we need to richen it up. So we need to increase this point by 3.1%. So this was the 3.7 volt. So going here, 3.1%. So multiply 1.031. Okay, next point down, 3.5. So 3.5 volts is right in here. And I'm just watching these numbers on the left next to my MAF V, but that's right around here. So, okay, so now this is something I want to talk about. So right in here, this happens to overlay, this 3.5 volts is right around the point where we're actually shifting the lambda down again. It's stepped from 1166 down to 1155 right in this region. And you have to remember, there's a little bit of a delay factor here that you always have to consider, because just because the car is now commanding that lambda, well, what has to happen now before anything actually changes? Well, now it's telling the injector duty cycle to change. So on those next few cycles, we're going to start to hopefully get more fuel. But then that stuff has to travel, it has to combust, it has to go through the exhaust, it has to hit the sensor has to send the signal back to the computer, and then we get the log. So your mass error reading is always going to be just slightly delayed from when, whatever your commanded is. In fact, the easiest way to see that, looking back at the beginning of this log, you can see right where we stab the throttle here. Look at the lambda in yellow. You can see that it goes from, something real normal cruising down to, richer immediately. It's almost a straight line down, but you notice you don't really see that type of a move on the AFR till we get to here. So you can almost see that we have this much gap between I'm asking for something richer and we're getting it. So what we want to what we get. So you have to keep that in mind, that, when you see these little shifts over here, whatever you're seeing on the mass air reading here might actually be based on what we were commanding just a little bit before it. So when I'm trying to tune out this point, which was 3.5 volts, we were right in here, and it looks like I'm getting, if I go back to the AFR, looks like it probably was reading AFR around 11.8. I'm going to calculate my error rate based on 11.8 versus this lambda here, which was 1176. So calc 11.8 minus 11.76, and you see that it's a negligible difference at this point. So, we're talking about just a tiny amount of fuel that's off, and then we divide that by our 11.76. So it's a third of 1%. So it's really not even worth jacking with at that point. So then we've got a little bit of consistency here. Looks like this, our fuel through the 3.3 range. I think that was my next voltage point. So around 3.3, you can see that I can just eyeball it and look at it. It's about 1% lean. So I'm just going to, instead of doing all the calculations at this point, I'll just add the 1%. Okay, next point down, 3.2. You can see through here our fuel's pretty much dialed in. I'm not going to mess with it. So really, the only place I see some big discrepancy is kind of through here now. This stuff is all, very, very close to commanded. This is up to about 2.95. These are all just a touch lean, but not much at all. So I'm going to go in, I'll make one more adjustment here. This is at 2.95 volts. So that's more or less here. So I'll take both of these and increase them by 1%. I should get those pretty close. And now we have to kind of work through this stuff again. So right through here, this is kind of the area you have to watch out for. So one of the other things to remember is that, there's also the concept of Excel enrichment fuel, where when you rapidly change throttle position, you stab the throttle or you very quickly come back out of the throttle. The computer knows that transient period right there for just a very brief second, is going to react poorly unless it asks for something a little excessive. So you would normally right here, you'd have some Excel enrichment fuel that kicks in to give it that little extra shot so your tip in doesn't look as lean like this. So, when you first stab the throttle, you may not want to immediately try to trust the data that you're seeing here as being like, oh, my mass air's off and I need to make some adjustments there. That may not really be the case. So what you really want to look at is your Excel enrichment fuel. Now, I don't know if that was actually even being logged here. No, it's not. So I can't look at what the Excel enrichment fuel was, but I do suspect that by the time we get out to this range, which is still, you can see the yellow lines, a bit different than here, I do think this is some legitimate area of the MAF that needs to be tuned. I suspect most of this is transient fuel, which I believe now needs to be increased, so I'll go do that later. But this is the part of the MAF that I'm really concerned with, and that's like 2.7 volts here to about 2.9 volts. So right there, my 2.8 is right between the two, and then the 2.6 is going to be, kind of right in here, right as it started to adjust. So I'll go ahead and bring both of those up, and now I can just kind of eyeball it and look at the difference here and the difference here. I think this is probably about 3% lean. So again, without forcing myself through the calculations, I'll just add 3%. Okay. Now, another thing that you want to do to just kind of spot check what you're doing here is you want to zoom your mass air transfer window here based on the range we care about. Because I'm not doing idle tuning. I don't really care about any of this stuff down here right now. And we know that this combo is not at the top of its MAF right now. This is our range. So what I'm going to do, kind of like we rescaled the other, I can right click in this graph and I can go to properties, and then we can just make a manual adjustment here. Now, we're only looking at one thing, so now we're going to have to adjust both the X and the Y. And a lot of times when you come in here, you'll see that these are both set to auto scale. And when that happens, it won't let you change these. They're grayed out. So if you come in here to make a manual adjustment, you can't. Turn off your auto scales, and now I can make a change. So the X-axis is left to right. So in this screen, that's my voltage. So I'm going to put in a range here of, let's do like a little down here. Let's do like 1.6 up through, I'll just take it up through 5 right now. And then on the y-axis, which is my airflow, what's kind of my range? Well, 5 is at 2340. So my upper, I'll put 2340, and 1.6 is at 144. So I'll put 144. Apply changes. And so now I can see that my, that's the part of my MAF curve that I've really been working on. And this stuff through here looks pretty good. That's where we made a lot of changes, pretty smooth. But you see a little bit of a bump right here to kind of go from lean to this rich, which is really going to be around that 2.5 volts because we just brought these up 3% and then there's no change here. So what I would probably do is if, I don't necessarily think I need more fuel at 2.5, but what I'm going to do here is if whatever my change was here, which was I added 3%, I'll just cut that in half and make that change here. It kind of smooths things out. So I'll increase this by 1.5%. And you can see that that's a little less disruptive here. So that kind of smoothed it out. And then up top, you can see we have a huge discrepancy. Now, this is a case right here where usually what I will do is if this was the highest point on the MAF we hit on that particular log, and keep in mind we're about to turn this up, so we will be hitting, with more timing and everything else, we're going to get into a little higher airflow soon. But what I'll do for now is I will take whatever I made this adjustment at, and I'll just apply that same thing up through the rest of the curve. So we adjusted it by 5.2% at the very top. So multiply 1.052. And you notice the rest of my curve is smooth all the way up. Because this, this started with just a transfer function that was just a real cookie cutter thing. So while it may not be right, it's at least smooth all the way through the curve. So this gets us back to something that's pretty smooth. So I suspect had I not done that on the next log when it pulls a little higher, we probably then would have seen a lean spike right there at the very, very end, even though everything else is real dialed in. So that's kind of where we're at. Now the final comment on this. And this, this just kind of depends on what stage of the tune you're in. So right now, like I just mentioned, we haven't turned this thing way up because we wanted to make sure our fuel's right. I have a lot of confidence now that after the changes I just made, it's going to be very, very close. So the next step is I'm going to keep commanding a little richer than I really want it to be right now, because right now we're commanding like 11.4, and I think we can probably lean that out a touch. But before I lean it out, I'm going to turn up the timing. And I'm not going to add that part in the video right now, but the reason I'm bringing it up is you need to know on that log, is that really about the highest airflow I'm likely to get to? And if it is, what does that mean? Well, you don't need all this stuff. You have to keep the top row at 16 volts for sort of error handling purposes, but you might not actually need a 5 and a 475 and a 450 and a 425. And so a trick that you can do, and I actually am going to do this right now, I'm going to kill the top row. I'm going to kill the 5 volt. And I'm going to take these 4 right here. I'm going to copy all those values. So just, right click, copy, and then I'll go up 1 here and paste it. Okay, so I basically just did that, and then you see I have this one in here 2 times. Now, because I don't have that extra row at the top, I can add in a new row here that's right between my 4.1 and 3.9 volts, so I can get a little bit more dialed in tune. So as you get to the top of your MAF curve where you really want to dial in your fuel, having as many points in that area as possible is really ideal. So what I can do is I've got a 3.9, a 4.1, I just created 4. Now I can take these 3 cells and I can interpolate vertically. And what that means is it'll take the top and bottom values and it'll smooth out the rest in between just to make it go through. So if you look at that again, my curve now stays normal again. So now I've got an extra point that we can tune here. We'll turn it up a little bit more, pull it a little higher, see what it does. And again, once we start pulling all the way to red line and we think that the timing's about where it's going to be, if I really still think that we've got headroom here and I know that this customer is not going to turn the boost up soon, then I might feel okay, killing another row out of the top there. And then give myself more tuning resolution around, 4.2, 4.3, where I suspect we'll need a little more attention on the next pass. So, guys, I hope this was beneficial to you, but I just kind of wanted to explain, my thought process and how I do the calculations. So if you don't have, tools that are helping you make these decisions along the way, this is how you can do it yourself. It's really not that hard. So, appreciate it. Good luck. Godspeed.